Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the grand, candlelit halls of medieval Europe, where velvet drapes, gold goblets, and thick perfume can't quite mask the scent of tension and blood beneath. You're not here as a guest, you're part of this wedding, one where nobody dares blink because the wrong nod, the wrong vow, the wrong bride might just start a war. The room shimmers with luxury, roasted boars lined with oranges, lute players humming a tune no one's really listening to, and noble women whispering behind embroidered fans. The groom's doublet is stitched with his house crest, sharp as a threat. The bride, draped in silk, the color of bruised plums, walking like she's heading to an execution, because, in some ways, she is. See, this isn't love. This is survival. The smiles are painted on. The guest list was negotiated like a peace treaty. And somewhere beneath all the toast-making and performative joy, two powerful families are locking into a fragile, tense alliance. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop me a comment with your city and what time you're listening. Midnight in Manila, 3 a.m. in Prague. I want to know who's here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're 15, maybe 16. Your hair's been brushed and braided for 3 hours. There's a floral wreath on your head, and underneath it, a sense of doom. Everyone keeps saying how lucky you are, but you've only met your husband-to-be twice. Once when you were 7, and again yesterday when he shook your hand like a diplomat signing a ceasefire. He's not cruel, but he's not kind either. Just trained, like you. He knows this is about land, titles, dowries, fertility, which is a very medieval way of saying, this union better produce healthy sons or someone's getting disinherited. Historians still argue whether noble women had more political influence because of these arranged marriages, or whether they were simply high-ranking pawns. The truth is probably both. Your family will gain 50 hectares of fertile valley farmland from this match, and in return, his family gains a daughter with pure, noble blood from 3 generations back. Everyone wins. Except you, if your husband dies early and his brother tries to claim you. It's happened. You sit at the high table, smiling stiffly at old men with stained fingers who call you "my dear" like they've already bought shares in your uterus. Behind them, banners hang, yours with a red lion, his with a silver oak. No one says it out loud, but everyone's thinking, let's hope these two creatures don't kill each other in their sleep. One weird detail, bloodletting is scheduled before the ceremony. Not for ritual reasons, no, just because physicians believe it balances your humors and keeps you from fainting. You almost do faint though, not from illness, but from the sheer weight of responsibility. You're supposed to represent your house now. One misstep, and your cousin might end up at war again. Oh, and the ceremony? It's not just, do you take this man? It's a series of vows in Latin, overseen by a priest who's clearly been bribed by both sides to keep things civil. The ring exchange is almost perfunctory, but the witnesses, all 12 of them, watch like hawks. If you flinch, if you mispronounce, if your groom hesitates, the rumors will start before dessert. You walk past the threshold into your new home that night, and people throw grain at your feet, not out of celebration, but because superstition says spilled wheat wards off curses. You pretend to laugh, even though you've barely eaten. They don't tell you this in fairy tales. The castle smells of oil, damp stone, a hint of decay from the servant who recently died of plague in the lower hall. And now, it smells of tension, too. You lie awake in a bed large enough to fit 5 people, but feel like you're the only one in the world. Your husband lies beside you, silent, already asleep. You wonder if he's dreaming of land divisions or of you. Probably land. A candle burns low on the table. You hear mice in the walls. Somewhere down the corridor, an owl hoots. But louder than all of that is the quiet knowledge that this isn't about love. It never was. This is politics draped in pearls and flowers, a chessboard covered with lace. And you're a queen, sure, but only if you survive. Your first morning as a married noblewoman doesn't begin with birdsong or breakfast in bed. It begins with someone knocking, 3 firm taps, the kind that say, "Get up, your performance continues." You sit up, and the gown you slept in clings damply to your skin. Medieval castles aren't known for their heating. The fireplace smolders with the last chunk of ashwood barely giving enough warmth to dry out the chill. Outside, the gray sky presses against the glass like wet parchment. A maid enters with a basin of icy water and a tray of honeyed porridge, thick, lumpy, and mostly symbolic. You're expected to break fast in private, then make your way to the Great Hall, where the real event begins. Gift-giving, more hand-kissing, and the ceremonial accounting of your dowry. Ah yes, the dowry, the single most romantic part of any medieval marriage. You may have brought livestock, bolts of silk, and a carved wooden chest filled with coin and jewelry, but what really matters are the land deeds, all itemized in ink, sealed with wax, and double-checked by lawyers who look like they haven't smiled since the last coronation. Historians still argue whether dowries empowered women or simply transferred their value from father to husband. On the one hand, your property technically remains yours. On the other hand, your husband controls it. So, potato, potato. Your new mother-in-law, who looks like she's made entirely of angles and judgment, comments on the embroidery on your sleeves. Not kindly. Apparently, the lion on your family crest should have had a double tail. Someone in your house forgot to update the stitching. You file this under things that will probably haunt you later. The real entertainment, though, is the post-wedding feast. Again. A second one because nobility believes in repetition. You get ushered into a chair beside your husband while minstrels sing about heroic love, mostly stories of knights dying for maidens who weren't that into them. Your husband lifts his goblet, nods politely, and you both drink. The wine tastes of sour cherries and obligation. Then comes the bedding ceremony, and yes, it's as awkward as it sounds. Now, it varies. Some courts just nod at the tradition, letting the couple retreat behind curtains. Others, the more theatrical ones, insist on a full procession. Guests following the couple to their chamber, clapping, tossing flower petals, and, in extreme cases, even supervising the unmaking of the bed. No pressure. Luckily, in your case, it's the restrained version. 2 witnesses follow, stand at the door, and listen for confirmation. That's it. Congratulations. You're officially, legally, politically consummated. The next morning, a servant quietly checks the linens for blood. This will be discussed over venison pie later. Oh, and your name? That's gone now. You are Lady of your husband's domain. Your signature changes. Your seal is remade. But your voice? You keep it soft for now. Here's a funny detail. While most weddings focus on appearance, medieval noble marriages often had weirdly specific beliefs about fertility. One popular superstition, that rabbits under your bed on your wedding night increase your odds of getting pregnant. Not actual rabbits, though, just embroidered ones, sewn into pillows. Historians still argue whether this was more about symbolism or just deeply weird medieval animal obsession. And now you're learning the next rule. Politics never stops. Because tomorrow, you and your husband ride out for the first formal visit to your new lands. You'll wave at peasants, bless a well, and pretend you're thrilled about the barley crop. But tonight, you're still here, still reeling, still holding your breath every time someone calls you my lady, like you've earned it. You lie awake again, not because of cold or mice, but because something new has taken root inside you. Power. Small, fragile, but real. You were given away like property, but you didn't break. And if you play this right, if you learn fast, you could turn this cursed chessboard into your own game. A candle flickers on the mantel. Outside, the wind hums through the stone corridors like an old lullaby. You wrap the blanket tighter and close your eyes. Tomorrow, you start walking the tightrope. But for now, just rest. Morning in your new lands smells like damp wool, horse sweat, and someone boiling onions way too early. You jolt awake in a rattling wooden cart. Yes, cart. No royal coach for this little countryside honeymoon tour. Instead, it's you, your husband, and half a dozen guards bouncing down a dirt road, waving dutifully at every passing peasant like you're running for office. Your husband's lands, as it turns out, are a mix of muddy fields, crumbling churches, and one surprisingly well-tended vineyard. It's not glamorous, but it's real. These are the people who now pay taxes to fund your linens, your pearls, your uncomfortable shoes. You're lady of the manor, which means, unfortunately, you have to pretend to care about the stay of the pig pens. By midday, you're standing at the edge of a small village where they've strung up flags made from old cloaks and someone's wedding veil. There's music, off-key but enthusiastic, and a table full of dried fruits and bread that the villagers absolutely could not afford to give you, but did anyway. You smile, you nod, you do the thing you practiced in the mirror, gracious but slightly detached, not too warm. You don't want them thinking they can just talk to you. Your husband speaks in that booming, noble voice that says, "I was taught rhetoric by a monk who hated children." You stand beside him, a decorative lamp with excellent posture. Historians still argue whether noble women had any real power in these moments, or were just expected to be decorative proof of prosperity. One school of thought says your presence meant stability. Another says it just gave the peasants something pretty to look at. Either way, your job today is to be calm, kind, and unnervingly quiet. And then the children appear. They sing a clumsy rhyme about spring and give you a basket of eggs. You smile again, even though the eggs are warm and still slightly feathery. It's fine. You're fine. Later that evening, you're seated inside the manor house of one of your husband's lesser vassals, a sort of cousin, but one of those cousins that looks like he might have 7 fingers on one hand. The room is low-ceilinged and filled with dried herbs, tapestries, and the unmistakable smell of sheep. You count at least 3 hiding behind the curtain. Dinner is rough bread, watery stew, and a very proud bottle of wine the host insists on opening himself. It tastes like vinegar mixed with ambition. But here's where it gets fun. The cousin's daughter, about your age, beautiful in that wild, unsupervised way. She plays the lute, laughs at your husband's jokes a little too long, and asks you where your necklace was made. You both know she's a threat. Because here's the thing no one tells you. The wedding didn't end the games. It just changed the board. Your husband may now be yours legally, but socially, politically, romantically, all bets are off. Side lovers, secret flirtations, political mistresses. These weren't scandals, they were strategy. A well-placed affair could secure an alliance or shatter one. And a clever wife had to know when to look away and when to strike. There's a reason noble women were often better at silent warfare than their blade-swinging husbands. You notice your husband smiling at the girl's song. You smile too, sweetly, and file her name away in your mental burn book. A quirky tidbit here. In some courts, noble wives were expected to write little poems or songs about their husband's suspected lovers, as a way to express their feelings constructively. Historians still argue whether this was meant as therapy or just passive-aggressive art. You excuse yourself from the table, feigning fatigue, and retreat to the tiny chamber prepared for you. The mattress is stuffed with straw and disappointment, and the window is just a square hole with a rag nailed over it. But still, you exhale, alone at last. You take off your necklace, setting it carefully by the wash basin. You stare at your reflection in the warped bit of polished tin hanging on the wall. You tilt your head, trying to see what the cousin's daughter saw when she asked about the jewels. Was it envy, or was it pity? Because sure, you've got the title, the land, the marriage, but she's got freedom. She can sing whatever she likes. She can flirt openly. She can leave the table early, and no one scolds her for it. You're the prize in a gilded cage. You lie down on the straw bed, scratchy and uneven. Somewhere in the manor, a dog barks, probably chewing on a sheep. You close your eyes and imagine yourself back in your own home, before all this, before the contracts, before the veil, before the girl with the lute and the smile that lingered too long. A breeze slips through the ragged window, carrying with it the smell of wet leaves and wood smoke. Tomorrow, you ride to the next village, more waving, more smiling, more pretending this life is what you wanted. But for now, you curl into yourself, cradled by straw, secrets, and the slow realization that power isn't taken with swords. It's taken with silence. By dawn, you're back on the road, hips bruised from the wooden bed frame, and your mood as brittle as stale pastry. The cart rolls on, wheels squeaking like it's complaining louder than you dare to. Your husband, blissfully unaware or masterfully pretending to be, hums a chant from his boyhood monastery days, off-key and with the confidence of someone who's never been told no. You arrive at another estate before noon, this one larger and grander, with tall chimneys and a slightly better ratio of humans to livestock. The lord here greets you with a smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes, and a wife who looks like she's been wearing the same expression for 20 years. Lunch is served in a long hall where tapestries try very hard to hide the cracks in the stone. Roasted game, thick gravy, and enough root vegetables to stock a plague shelter. A fire crackles behind you, hot enough to roast your back while your front freezes in the drafty air. Welcome to the medieval thermostat. The host's daughter is being paraded like a prized heifer. 16, pale, eyes darting nervously. She's the topic of discussion, specifically who she might be married off to before her next moon cycle. You sip your wine and offer the girl a subtle, pitying smile. She has no idea how many contracts are being scribbled in the minds of men while she stares at her spoon. This is the reality of noble marriage. Bloodlines first, feelings second, or more accurately, not at all. You were lucky, relatively. You weren't 12, you weren't sold off to someone 50 years your senior, and at least your husband's breath only smells vaguely of garlic. But still, your furniture, a diplomatic couch. Historians still argue whether noble women ever truly bought into the myth of romantic union, or if most understood the cold mechanics from childhood. Letters from the era suggest both. Some wrote odes to absent husbands, while others quietly plotted poison dosages. After the meal, the women are ushered into a solar, a private sitting room bathed in afternoon light and heavy perfume. It's the theater of civility. You exchange stories with the other noble wives, mostly coded gossip, whispered in safe tones. "My husband has taken up falconry again," one says, which you know means he's visiting that widow in the next shire again. "Oh, how lovely," you reply, meaning, "And you haven't strangled him yet?" One woman, older, sharp-eyed, and silent until now, finally speaks. "Do you like your husband?" The room freezes. Even the dog under the table stops chewing its own foot. You consider the question longer than polite society allows, then say, "I like that he doesn't ask me to like him." That earns a nod from the older woman. Respect, maybe, or solidarity. Either way, you're collecting quiet allies, and that's almost better than jewels. A quirky tidbit: in certain noble households, women secretly communicated via embroidery. Patterns stitched into cushions or wall hangings weren't just pretty, they were codes. A vine that twisted left meant a rival was having an affair. A stitched falcon? Watch your husband's steward. Historians still argue whether this counts as espionage or just very elaborate pettiness. Back in the main hall, your husband is laughing too loudly with a baron from the neighboring shire. Politics are brewing, which means marriages are being traded like chess pieces. You're not just watching the game, you're in it, whether you like it or not. And just when you think the day can't get any more performative, you're asked to bless the newborn child of a serving maid, as if your presence carries divine weight now. You place your hand gently on the baby's fuzzy head and say the words they want to hear. The mother cries. You feel like a fraud. On the way back to your chamber, you pause near the stables, watching as a boy grooms your horse. You envy the simplicity of it. Dirt, straw, muscle. No veils, no poison smiles. "Milady," he says, eyes wide, hand to chest. You nod, keep walking. You can't afford to be seen looking wistful, not tonight. Back in your room, the fire is low, the window covered with thick cloth to block the chill. You sit by the small mirror again, unpinning your hair, watching it fall like a curtain. No one teaches you how lonely power can feel, or how your reflection changes after you've smiled politely through 42 straight conversations about wheat production and marital alliances. Your husband joins you, finally. He talks about the baron's offer to merge holdings through a secondary marriage, a polite way of saying he's considering a mistress with a dowry. You nod. You sip your wine. You file the girl's name and her dowry amount away for later. "Do you mind?" he asks, not really asking. You look at him, steady. "As long as she doesn't embarrass me." That, somehow, makes him respect you more. You lie beside him that night with the practiced stillness of someone who's perfected the art of emotional sleepwalking. You stare at the ceiling, counting the wooden beams overhead. 1 for every lie told that day. 2 for every name you'll remember in case revenge is required. The wind howls outside, and you pretend it's just weather, not a warning. Because tonight you realized something. This life isn't just about surviving. It's about cataloging, observing, learning who you can outlast, and if you're very, very careful, outmaneuver. You wake to bells in the distance. Not church bells. Those come with order and rhythm. These sound more like someone dropped a cow onto a copper pan. You sit up, hair in a tangled halo, mouth dry as old parchment. Your husband is already gone, and the fire's gone with him. Cold stone greets your feet like a slap. You pull on yesterday's gown, wrinkled and slightly sour. It's fine. No one expects a duchess to smell like a garden in February. You step into the corridor where servants scatter like startled rats, eyes down. Something's happened. Downstairs, you catch wind of the news. The Baron from last night, your husband's drinking companion, has had a domestic incident. His eldest daughter is missing, vanished in the night from her chamber. Her wedding was set for next week. This, you think, sipping your watered wine at breakfast, is why noble marriages rarely end with a cake and a waltz. They're binding contracts written in blood, sweat, and desperation. And sometimes, girls run. The Baron's wife arrives by noon, soaked in tears and perfume. She collapses onto a bench and wails in a key that could probably summon crows. You sit beside her, awkwardly offering a handkerchief she won't use. It's all pageantry. Even grief has an audience. Historians still argue whether noble daughters who fled arranged marriages did so with help, from sympathetic mothers, from maids, even from secret lovers, or whether they simply snapped, packed a few apples, and vanished into the woods. In this case, the girl was last seen near the chapel, her slippers found beside the altar. Dramatic, but thematically consistent. You're expected to help soothe the household, which apparently means drinking tea in silence while everyone around you panics. The Baron accuses a maid of helping the girl escape. The maid, a pale wisp of a thing, denies everything. She's flogged anyway, her screams bouncing off stone like spilled wine off linen. You don't flinch, but your stomach knots. Was it worth it? You whisper under your breath, imagining the girl running through a moonlit forest, dress torn, heart pounding. Maybe she has a plan. Maybe she has a horse. Maybe she just has enough courage for one more step. A quirky detail. In some noble households, runaway brides were declared legally dead after 7 years and their dowries reclaimed, unless they sent back a personal item like a comb or a tooth. That's right, a tooth. The Middle Ages had a flair for dramatic accounting. The day drags. Your husband paces like a caged wolf, muttering about family dishonor and the ripple effect on trade negotiations. You consider suggesting he lie down with a lavender sachet. You don't. That evening, a search party is assembled. Nobles ride out with torches and gritted teeth. You stay behind, ostensibly to offer solace to the lady of the house. In reality, you want to observe. People show you who they really are when they think the world's on fire. You find the Baron's wife in the chapel, surrounded by melted wax and failed prayers. She clutches a ribbon. "She used to wear this around her wrist," she says, voice low, ragged, "even to bed." You crouch beside her, suddenly not a duchess, not a diplomat, just a woman thinking of another girl who almost didn't make it to her wedding day. "Do you think she loved him?" the Baroness asks. "I think she didn't love being property," you say softly. She nods. "It's the closest thing to an alliance you'll get." Later, in the guest room, lit by a single flickering candle, you stare at the ceiling again. The beams haven't changed, but something inside you has shifted. You imagine that girl again, muddy and breathless, cresting a hill at dawn. Maybe she found a monastery to hide in. Maybe she cut her hair and joined a traveling troupe of actors. Maybe she's already dead. But maybe, just maybe, she'll write a story someday. A story no one expects from a noble girl with no title but her own name. Historians still argue whether noble women like her were victims, rebels, or something more complicated. You suspect the answer is yes to all of it. As you drift into sleep, you feel something like warmth. Not comfort, no, that's a rare luxury in this world, but defiance, quiet, internal, unlit, like a candle waiting for the right breath to catch fire. You stay seated because standing right now feels like a commitment you're not emotionally or gastrointestinally ready for. The food has settled in your belly like a stone wrapped in wool. And now, as the fire crackles louder than the conversation, goblets begin to refill with something darker, redder, and much more dangerous than the earlier table wine. Welcome to Phase 2 of the evening, the part where you might accidentally become someone's godparent, betrothed, or sworn enemy. The Lord claps twice, and a servant brings out a clay jug etched with odd markings. It's likely imported. Someone whispers that it's Hippocras, a spiced wine sweetened with honey and steeped with cinnamon, cloves, and ginger. Another claims it's just weak vinegar with lies in it. But when your cup is filled and passed to you, it smells like mulled wine's more ambitious cousin. You sip. It's warm, sweet, and it hits your bloodstream faster than a trebuchet launch. No wonder nobles drank this stuff nightly. Anyone would feel important after half a goblet. And soon, you're in a room of people all slightly buzzed, cheeks flushed, voices louder, laughter looser. It's the medieval equivalent of a Friday night with no closing hours and no one counting drinks. Someone nearby toasts to Saint Dunstan. Someone else toasts to the cook, whose eyebrows are singed but triumphant. You raise your cup vaguely toward the ceiling and mutter, "To digestion." Nobody hears you. That's fine. You swirl the Hippocras, trying to look noble. It sloshes dramatically. Historians still argue whether Hippocras was strictly a post-meal treat or enjoyed throughout elite feasts. The recipes vary by region, and some even included edible gold flakes. None of that here, though. Your goblet contains the basics: wine, spice, sugar, and something that might be rosemary, or possibly just old cork. Then comes the mead. Ah yes, mead. The oldest beverage with the cutest name. Fermented honey water sounds gentle until you're on your third cup and suddenly you're ready to start a revolution or recite poetry in Old English. It's poured from tall, oddly shaped flagons. The mead is golden, slightly cloudy, and surprisingly fizzy. You take a gulp. It tastes like beeswax made a pact with alcohol and kept their promise. Servants continue rotating jugs like they're running a marathon. Someone starts playing a pipe, a cheerful, meandering tune that sounds like a squirrel in leather boots tap dancing down a staircase. Now, the real stories begin. The knight to your left, his armor half unbuckled and tunic stained with mustard, leans in and tells a tale of a ghost dog that haunts a priory. His breath smells like cloves and liver. You nod politely. Across the table, two young squires are engaged in a heated debate about whether dragons can swim. One of them says yes confidently. The other insists dragons fear holy water. Neither has a source. You drink your wine and decide not to weigh in. Meanwhile, the Lord rises unsteadily from his carved wooden chair, goblet in hand, and starts telling a story involving his great-grandfather, a French bishop, and a suspiciously intelligent pig. This tale goes on for 7 full minutes. There is no clear ending. No one minds. Someone starts clapping anyway. A servant rushes to refill goblets like they're in the middle of a military drill. Yours gets topped off before you even notice. You're tipsy now, properly medieval tipsy. It's the kind of gentle warmth that makes you feel poetic. You contemplate the flickering candlelight, the smoke curling toward the beams, the way the shadows move like ancient dancers in long-forgotten rituals. Then someone starts to sing. At first it's soft, a solo voice, cracked and low. But soon more join in. It's a drinking song, in Latin or Middle English, or possibly both. The tune is repetitive. The chorus comes around quickly. You hum along. Suddenly you're swaying, not dancing, just gently wobbling in time with the hall itself, as if the building is exhaling after a long day of existing in the 13th century. You bump elbows with your neighbor. He gives you a solemn nod and a meat bone. You're not sure what to do with it, so you hold it like a scepter. The singing continues, louder, more joyful, off-key and wonderful. A dog howls along. No one tells it to stop. A monk at the far end of the hall begins quoting scripture, but he's slurring too badly for anyone to notice its revelations. You're smiling now, flushed, full of bread and wine and honeyed almonds and mystery milk fritters. It's a strange kind of comfort. Not sanitary, not safe, but real, raw, undeniably human. And just when you think the night can't possibly get weirder, someone starts juggling chicken bones. There's a cheer. The jester reappears with a drum and no shirt. You have questions. You ask none of them. The nobleman to your right suddenly stands and announces that he will recite a love poem he composed for a goose. The room falls into respectful silence. He begins. It rhymes. Kind of. Someone weeps. The fire pops loudly. You sip the last of your mead and let the heat of it melt down your spine. For a moment, the centuries fall away. The smells, the songs, the sticky hands and crude jokes, they're all so alive. It's nothing like the museum exhibits or sanitized reenactments. This isn't a reenactment. This is chaos, fermented and poured into a wooden cup. And you're drunk enough to love it. You're still holding the chicken bone scepter when the fire dims slightly and someone snuffs out a few candles. Not for ambience, just because they've run out of tallow. The room hushes for a brief moment, as if the very architecture is taking a breath. Then, from a dark corner near the tapestries, a harp begins to play. Not the flashy angel harp kind. This one's small, wooden, and missing a string. The notes are slightly off, but in the wavering glow of the remaining candles, it sounds like the beginning of a bedtime story told by someone who's seen too much war. You lean back, or forward, it's hard to tell anymore. A bard shuffles into the circle of firelight, his robes patched with unrelated fabrics, some velvet, some burlap. He wears a wreath of dried herbs on his head and smells faintly of onions and destiny. Everyone quiets, even the juggler sits. The bard starts to sing, his voice raspy but rhythmic. The story is about a knight, of course, and a cursed bridge made entirely of bones. There's a witch, naturally, and a talking mule named Bertrand, who betrays no one but still somehow causes the downfall of a kingdom. You're captivated. The lyrics make little sense, but the cadence lulls you. There's something about the way his fingers pluck the harp, and his eyes glint with each plot twist. It's less about the logic and more about the vibe. Kinda like reading medieval tax records while tipsy. You don't understand it, but you feel it. Historians still argue whether bards at noble tables were actual musicians or just tolerated freeloaders with good gossip. Some were household fixtures, others wandering minstrels with a flair for political satire in the form of poorly disguised fairy tales. This one seems to straddle both camps. His song takes a sudden turn when Bertrand the mule becomes king. You applaud instinctively. The nobleman next to you whispers, "That part's based on true events." You nod solemnly. Of course it is. A new voice joins in, someone harmonizing off to the side, probably a cousin or servant with dreams of bardhood. The two singers swirl their voices together like honey into warm ale. And just as suddenly, the story ends. There is no moral, no resolution, just a final chord that fades into the crackle of the fire. You blink slowly. The candles now cast tall, exaggerated shadows that dance across the stone walls. One resembles a bear wearing a crown, or maybe that's just the mead talking. A page boy clears his throat and reads aloud a translated poem from the Latin. It's about a tree that falls in love with a nun. She carves prayers into his bark. He bleeds sap for her. They never touch. It's deeply weird. Another noble shouts for a round of riddles. A servant girl asks, "What walks on 4 legs at dawn, 2 at noon, and 3 at dusk?" Several drunk voices shout, "The Pope," and "A really confused donkey," and one simply yells, "Bread." Eventually, someone gets it right, probably by accident. Then the firewood is restocked. A few logs hiss as they meet the embers, and the smell of resin and smoke curls up into your nose, laced with the faintest trace of wet dog. The Lord's hound has curled up by your feet. It may have claimed you. Someone begins reciting genealogy, back 17 generations. You zone out somewhere around Edgar the Fickle and start daydreaming about what your own medieval title would be. You, the slightly sunburned, or you of the unwise mead choices. Probably both. The genealogy lecture devolves into a loud argument about whose great-grandfather actually took part in the Battle of Lewis. Voices rise, fingers point. One man declares, "My ancestor held the banner." Another scoffs and says, "Your ancestor held the horse's tail." You smile into your goblet. The insults are oddly specific and impressively petty. Eventually, the Lord himself interrupts. He claps once and declares that it's time for the challenge. Oh no, you immediately regret every almond and goblet you've consumed. The challenge, it turns out, is not a duel, thankfully, but a storytelling contest. Each table selects one representative. You are inexplicably chosen. Probably because you haven't vomited and you're still upright, or because you made eye contact at the wrong time. You stand. Your knees betray you briefly, but you recover. A silence falls. Not respectful, more concerned. You begin with something vague about a dream you once had, involving a goose, a storm, and a glowing loaf of bread. The crowd is polite but confused. You throw in a dragon for good measure. Laughter. Someone calls it a visionary tale. Someone else calls it heresy adjacent. The Lord laughs the hardest and waves for another drink to be brought to you. It's unclear if it's a reward or a punishment. And then, the moment you sit down, the minstrel from earlier leans over and whispers, "You should hear my version of that story." You both burst out laughing. You're not sure why. The hall is dimmer now, candles almost gone. A few nobles have dozed off in their chairs, mouths open like low-rank gargoyles. The jester is napping face down in a trench of breadcrumbs. Even the harp lies silent, resting in the arms of its sleepy bard. The fire crackles with a softer rhythm. The room feels smaller, softer, less like a feast hall, and more like a memory you'll wake up from in 500 years and think, "Did I really drink from a pewter cup while a mule became king?" Yes, you did. And as you settle into your wooden chair, belly full of questionable protein, ears full of ghostly harp notes, you feel it. The strange peace of having survived a medieval dinner party without dueling, fainting, or insulting the bishop's eyebrows. You might even live to see breakfast. The fire's almost down to embers now. You can hear the wood sigh as it gives up its last hiss of sap. Most of the nobles have slumped in their seats like melted wax figures. Some snore. One has his face firmly planted in a bowl of congealed barley stew, which, frankly, is still more dignified than the way the steward is currently trying to eat a turnip in his sleep. You, meanwhile, are still upright, barely, but you've been promised cheese. And in a medieval hall, cheese is never just cheese, it's an event. A gong rings, not because it's necessary, but because the steward really likes using it. The sound echoes through the rafters like a bored god yawning. And then, with exaggerated ceremony, the cheese cart rolls in. Not pushed, pulled, by two small oxen, draped in velvet. No one questions this. You certainly don't. The cart itself is impressive. Polished wood, engraved with vines and little saints holding wheels of cheese. On top, a cloth of gold covering hides the treasure. The crowd perks up. Even the guy who drooled into his stew stirs and mutters, "Brie." You lean forward, ready. The steward dramatically peels back the cloth, and there it is, the cheese wheel. Enormous, sun yellow, cracked just enough to show its creamy, mildly alarming insides. Beside it, a blue-veined wedge that smells faintly like regret and wet caves. There's a soft goat cheese rolled in herbs, which someone immediately claims as their birthright. And a smoked cheese so tough you could shingle a cottage. This is the climax. This is the last boss battle of the feast. The knife is passed around ceremonially. Everyone takes a wedge. You're handed a slice that looks like it could either heal you or haunt your digestive tract forever. You take a bite. It's sharp, sour, strangely floral. Kinda like chewing on a monk's philosophy thesis. Historians still argue whether medieval cheese was actually good or if everyone's taste buds were just too malnourished to complain. Most agree that by this point in the meal, you'd eat anything that wasn't actively trying to bite back. A noblewoman across the table declares the cheese heavenly and immediately follows it with a prayer for digestive mercy. Someone offers fruit preserves, plums soaked in wine, and tiny apples pickled with rosemary. The combination is oddly modern. You half expect a bearded sommelier to walk in and suggest a Chardonnay pairing. Instead, you get another hunk of dark bread and a whisper from a servant girl offering honey scraped from the comb that morning. She says it's from the Lord's private hive. You try a dab? It's sunlight. You'd marry it. The crowd is quieter now. The loud jokes are gone. People chew slowly, sigh occasionally. The cheese, like some dairy lullaby, is calming them all. A scribe begins reading poetry again, this time from a tiny book bound in calfskin. The verse is about winter and longing and, confusingly, radishes. You're not sure if it's meant to be funny or not, but the old knight beside you is weeping openly, so you pat his chainmail and nod. The bard from earlier hums in the background, plucking the harp with less confidence but more emotion. One of the oxen lies down. No one moves it. You hear a story drift through the hall, one noble quietly telling another about a cheese so potent it was outlawed during a siege for inviting the plague. Probably not true, but you write it down in your head for later. Your chair creaks. You shift. Somewhere in the rafters, an owl hoots once. The cheese is nearly gone. Only crumbs and rinds remain, and the smoked one appears to have been repurposed as a doorstop. At this point, dessert appears, or what passes for dessert. Bowls of pears stewed in wine, trays of almond-stuffed dates, a cake made from crushed barley, honey, and what the cook only describes as forest flavors. You try a bite? It tastes like a pine cone had a dream. Still, you finish it, because it's dessert, and in this castle, not liking dessert might get you excommunicated. Across the table, someone begins to sing again. A lullaby, maybe, or a hymn. It's slow, circular, the kind of melody that could go on forever and you wouldn't notice. You sway slightly, or maybe that's the table. There's a toast, soft, slurred. To Lord Aelric, someone mumbles, who once defeated an entire Viking raid by refusing to open the gates and throwing out stale cheese until they left. Everyone cheers, except the dog. It's asleep on your foot now, warm and snoring like a knight in comfortable armor. The steward asks if anyone would like boiled nuts. No one answers. He brings them anyway. They're lukewarm and vaguely spicy. You eat two and hide the rest in your sleeve. A boy begins juggling apples. He's very bad at it. No one cares. It's almost peaceful now, the hall wrapped in the last ribbons of smoke and candlelight. One by one, the guests nod off, heads tilted, hands clasped over bellies like saints in tomb carvings. You glance down at your plate, crusts, crumbs, a smear of honey, and realize you've made it. The whole meal. Survived it. Endured every riddle, every root vegetable, every unsolicited poem about longing and radishes. You wipe your fingers on the cloth, technically someone's cloak, lean back, and let your eyes flutter shut. Somewhere, someone whispers a final story. Something about a knight who wandered into a forest and found a tower made entirely of bread. You smile. You dream of cheese wheels rolling down hills like brave warriors. You wake, or maybe you were never quite asleep, to the delicate sound of chains clinking. Not ominous ones, just the gentle rattle of someone in armor trying very, very hard to tiptoe. It's Lord Elric. He's attempting a quiet exit, unsuccessfully. You crack one eye open and see him shuffling past a tapestry, his ceremonial sword dragging softly behind him like a reluctant child. He spots you, pauses, gives you a sheepish thumbs up, then keeps moving. Apparently, bedtime is upon you. And in a medieval castle, that's an ordeal in itself. The hall is dim now. Only a few candles remain, their wax pooling like miniature lakes on silver plates. The hearth fire has shrunk to embers, casting orange shadows that dance along the stone like drunken ghosts. The dog's still snoring on your foot. A servant appears at your elbow, holding what looks like a washcloth and an attitude. She gestures for you to stand. You oblige, limbs heavy and full of cheese. You're escorted, slowly, carefully, out of the great hall and through the darkened corridors of the keep. The walls here are close and cold, made of thick stone that never warms up no matter how many tapestries they hang. You swear you passed the same rusty suit of armor 3 times, but the servant says nothing. Eventually, you arrive at your chamber. It's a room, you'll give it that. A narrow bed, a chest, a single candle, and something that might be a chair but looks like it could bite. There's no fireplace, but there is a small brazier filled with embers. You lean toward it, hoping for warmth. It wheezes and gives you a puff of ash instead. Welcome to a noble guest room in a medieval castle. Historians still argue whether these rooms were actually meant to be comfortable or if discomfort was part of the hospitality. After all, if your guest isn't sleeping well, they're not plotting against you. It's like medieval Airbnb, but with more paranoia and fewer throw pillows. The servant offers you a linen nightshirt. It is stiff. It smells like lie and regret. You put it on anyway. There's a jug of water on a stool. Beside it, a tiny ceramic chamber pot that looks like it's already seen too much. You avoid eye contact with both. You sit on the bed. It creaks like an old man being asked to dance. The mattress is stuffed with straw, the kind that occasionally has its own opinions and little legs. You flatten it out with your hands and try not to think about the fact that feathers were reserved for royalty, or possibly chickens with better lawyers. Above you, a single spider performs its nightly acrobatics. You wish it well. You blow out the candle, and now it's just you, the dark, and your very full belly. The room is quiet, save for the occasional pop from the brazier and the sound of your own digestive system negotiating peace treaties. You lie back, staring into the dark, and start to reflect. On the bread, the meats, the endless cups of wine that may or might not have had a hint of iron in them. Still not sure if that was flavoring or someone's forgotten dagger. You remember the cheese cart, the oxen, the noblewoman who whispered that she once saw a wheel of Gouda roll down a mountain and crush a tax collector. Possibly a dream, possibly real. You think about the fish, the mysterious green sauces, the way everything was either boiled or burned and somehow still edible. Your stomach gurgles in agreement. There's a sound in the corridor, a scraping, followed by a low thump. You don't investigate. Nothing good ever comes from midnight castle investigations. Instead, you curl tighter into the thin wool blanket and try to find a position that doesn't involve your hips poking the bed frame like a medieval xylophone. The wind whistles outside. The window slit lets in a ribbon of moonlight and cold air. You pull the blanket over your head and pretend you're in a cocoon made of wool and distant fart sounds echoing through stone. Historians still debate how common it was for guests to actually sleep inside the castle keep itself. Some claim that most visitors were stuffed into barracks or outbuildings unless they were incredibly important. Others argue that nobles loved showing off their draftiest rooms. Either way, you've earned your spot here by simply surviving dinner. The brazier hisses again. You're warmish, kind of, maybe. You start drifting. You dream of carrots the size of spears, of monks arguing over whether raisins belong in pudding, of a pig in a waistcoat politely asking if you'd like more ale. You're not sure if you're asleep, but you're definitely no longer entirely present. Until you hear the bells. Distant, slow, rhythmic. It's the midnight prayers. Or maybe a ghost wedding. Could go either way. You roll over, try to tune them out, but now your brain has decided to replay everything that happened in the past 10 hours. The servant with the haunted eyes, the turnip poetry, the hard cheese that may have cracked a tooth. Your eyes adjust to the dark. You notice something scuttling across the floor. You pretend it's a friendly beetle and name it Jeffrey. Jeffrey minds his own business. You envy him. Eventually, after what feels like a century, your body gives up. The wine, the walking, the sheer volume of goat butter, it all drags you down like velvet weights tied to your limbs. You sleep. And the castle sleeps too. Mostly. A candle flares in some distant corridor. A rat waltzes through the pantry. And Lord Aelric? He's probably sleepwalking into the moat again. But you're still, wrapped like a sad little burrito in scratchy linen, dreaming of cheese wheels and barley porridge. And somewhere, the spider above your bed spins just one more thread. Dawn creeps slowly into your room, sneaking through the narrow window slit like a shy cat. The chill in the air wakes you up abruptly, reminding you that medieval castles were not built with comfort in mind. They were built to keep enemies out, not guests warm. Your breath puffs in small clouds, mingling with the faint scent of damp stone and leftover cheese crumbs from last night's feast. You roll out of bed, stiff and groggy, and find the chamber pot where you left it. The routine is humbling, but it's medieval life, and you're living it, one awkward moment at a time. There's no hot water, no fluffy towels, just a basin of cold water and a rough cloth for washing. You splash your face and attempt to shake off the lingering haze of wine and cheese. Outside, the castle is waking. The clatter of wooden wheels on cobblestones, the bleating of goats, and the low murmur of servants preparing for the day's labors fill the air. You hear the distant crowing of a rooster, though historians debate whether the cock's wake-up call was actually that reliable back then, or just a nice bedtime story. You follow a narrow stone staircase down to the great hall, where the morning meal is being set out. It's a simpler affair than last night's banquet: coarse bread, porridge, and something resembling watered-down ale. The Lord Steward greets you with a nod and a gruff "good morrow." You wonder if he's still trying to shake off last night's cheese coma. Breakfast is quiet, except for the clink of wooden spoons and the occasional murmur of monks chanting in the chapel nearby. There's a roasted bird, probably pigeon, with herbs that fill the hall with a sharp, piney scent. You nibble cautiously, aware that medieval cooking wasn't always kind to modern palates. You notice a small boy darting through the crowd, balancing a tray of fresh eggs on his head. One slips off and cracks on the floor. No one seems surprised. You get the impression that such mishaps are as common as knights losing their helmets in battle. Historians still argue whether medieval breakfasts were actually more nutritious than dinners or just more practical, designed to fuel long hours of labor. Either way, you're grateful for the meal and the warmth of the fire. As you eat, a minstrel begins tuning his lute, preparing for the day's entertainment. His fingers fumble over the strings, producing a jangle that somehow feels charming rather than off-key. You lean back and let the melody wash over you, feeling the slow rhythm of castle life settle into your bones. Outside the hall, you catch a glimpse of the castle's vegetable garden. Rows of hardy greens and root vegetables poke through the soil, their leaves glistening with morning dew. You imagine the cooks hauling these in later, transforming them into stews and pottages to sustain the household. A woman with a basket of freshly baked bread passes by, her hands dusted with flour. She smiles briefly before disappearing down a corridor, and you wonder how many loaves she's baked this week alone. You sip your ale, now warmed by the rising sun, and think back to the night's cheese feast, the strange poetry, and the awkward dance of the oxen-pulled cart. Somehow, it all feels a little less strange now, more like a glimpse into a world both distant and familiar. Outside, the castle bells toll the hour, their sound rolling over the hills like a call to action, or maybe just a reminder that life inside these stone walls never truly stops. You finish your breakfast, ready to face whatever medieval adventure awaits next. You step outside into the cool morning air, the castle's massive stone walls towering above you like ancient giants still guarding their secrets. The courtyard bustles quietly now, not with warriors or nobles, but with servants, stable hands, and children chasing each other through the dirt. You catch the scent of wood smoke from the kitchens mingling with fresh earth and the faintest hint of lavender, probably from one of the herb gardens. The sun's barely risen, but already promises to burn off the morning mist that clings to the ground like a stubborn fog. A group of farmers arrives, their carts creaking under the weight of the day's fresh harvest. You watch as they unload sacks of barley and bundles of cabbage, their faces weathered but steady. Someone jokes about how cabbage smells better once cooked, which you decide to file under medieval wisdom, or maybe just desperate optimism. As you wander the courtyard, you notice the castle's well. It's a deep, dark pit carved from stone, its bucket on a rope slowly lowered and raised by a crank. The water inside is cold and clear, a precious resource in a place where running water was about as common as a tax-free feast. A young girl approaches, carrying a basket of eggs. She balances it expertly, clearly practiced at this daily chore. You think about how much work goes into keeping a medieval household running, fetching water, tending animals, baking bread, and managing the endless cleaning, or at least trying to. You recall the odd detail you read once about how servants sometimes used vinegar to disinfect the castle's common areas, long before anyone understood germs. It probably smelled worse than the medieval cheese platter, but hey, hygiene was a work in progress. Historians still debate whether castle courtyards were more chaotic or more organized than we imagine. Some argue they were bustling hubs of activity and gossip, while others insist they were tightly controlled spaces where everyone knew their place. Your gaze drifts to the stables, where horses stomp and neigh, impatient to be ridden or fed. A stable hand brushes down a sleek black stallion, humming a tune that somehow reminds you of a modern pop song, though maybe that's just your imagination. Nearby, the castle's blacksmith is already at work, sparks flying as he hammers red-hot iron into horseshoes and tools. The rhythmic clang echoes through the courtyard like a heartbeat, steady and sure. You watch a group of men practicing swordplay, their wooden training swords thudding against shields with a dull, satisfying thump. You imagine the real thing must have been much louder and far more dangerous. As the sun climbs higher, the castle's rhythm quickens. Carts roll in and out, voices rise and fall, and somewhere a dog barks enthusiastically at a stray cat. You smile, feeling the pulse of medieval life beat strong in this stone fortress. You lean against the wall, taking it all in, and realize that despite the rough edges and hardships, there's a strange beauty in this daily dance, a life balanced between survival and ceremony, toil and tradition. The smell of fresh bread wafts from the kitchen again. You decide it's time for a second breakfast, or maybe just a slice of that mysterious ancient cheese. You wander toward the castle's chapel, where morning prayers are underway. The scent of burning incense mingles with cold stone and faint traces of beeswax from melting candles. Voices rise and fall in Latin chants, echoing through the vaulted ceilings like a soothing lullaby for the restless stone. The chapel is small but beautifully adorned. Stained glass windows filter the sunlight into kaleidoscopes of color that dance gently on the cold floor. A few monks kneel in silent devotion, their robes whispering softly as they move. You take a seat on a wooden pew, feeling the rough grain under your fingers. The air is thick with devotion and centuries of whispered confessions, secret prayers, and maybe the occasional complaint about the monastery's bland porridge. You overhear a monk mutter about the latest theological debate, whether salvation requires strict adherence to ritual or if faith alone is enough. Historians still argue over the impact of these debates on daily medieval life, but for now, you just appreciate the serene calm. Outside the chapel, the castle gardens are bursting with early spring blooms. Herbs like rosemary, thyme, and sage grow in neat rows, their aromas promising flavor and medicinal relief. A gardener tends the beds, humming a tuneless song as she weeds. You learn that medieval cooks prized fresh herbs not only for taste, but also because they believed herbs could ward off disease. A medieval version of natural antibiotics, though with less scientific certainty. You wander toward the castle's library, a small room stacked with scrolls, parchments, and leather-bound tomes. The air here smells of old paper and ink, slightly musty but comforting. A scholar pores over a manuscript by candlelight, quill in hand. It's impressive to think that despite all the hardships, these castles were centers of knowledge, where monks and nobles alike could study philosophy, astronomy, and even the occasional poem. You remember that curious tidbit about how some medieval scribes used garlic-infused ink to ward off evil spirits. Whether it worked or not is anyone's guess, but it certainly adds flavor to the idea of ancient scholarship. You decide to rest on a bench and take in the quiet moments before the castle fully wakes. The soft clatter of armor begins again, and you realize the day's training sessions are about to resume. Knights practice their horsemanship and swordplay, the sounds echoing through the courtyard like a promise of protection and power. You feel the slow, steady pulse of life in the castle, a rhythm of prayer, study, toil, and vigilance that has carried through centuries. As you sit back, you can't help but wonder what secrets these walls would tell if they could speak, not just about battles and politics, but about the small, everyday moments like this one. And with that thought, you close your eyes briefly, letting the peaceful hum of medieval life wash over you. The afternoon sun now bathes the castle in a warm, golden light, making the ancient stones glow softly. You stroll toward the great hall, where preparations for the evening feast are already underway. The hustle of servants and cooks blends into a quiet, steady rhythm that feels oddly soothing. You catch the aroma of roasting meat, probably a boar or deer, mingled with the earthy scent of root vegetables and spices brought from faraway lands. The idea of cinnamon and cloves in a medieval kitchen might surprise you, but medieval cooks loved exotic flavors as much as anyone. One curious detail you remember is that spices were so precious they were sometimes used as currency or gifts for kings. Historians still debate how widespread their use was among common folk, but in the Lord's Hall, you can bet they were front and center. The cooks move with practiced efficiency, chopping, stirring, and seasoning as the day wears on. You spot a young apprentice nervously trying to juggle a handful of onions, perhaps a recipe for tears or something worse. You wander past a barrel of ale, its frothy head promising relief after a long day. Ale was safer to drink than water back then, due to the brewing process killing off harmful bacteria, so the locals relied on it heavily. Though you might want to take it easy if you have a meeting with the Lord later. A bard tunes his lute nearby, readying himself for the evening's entertainment. His fingers pluck a few strings hesitantly, producing a soft melody that floats through the hall like a warm embrace. You find a seat near the hearth, where the fire crackles and pops, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Tapestries depicting battles and noble ancestors hang nearby, their colors faded but still rich with stories. The Lord himself arrives, resplendent in a fur-trimmed cloak and a jeweled brooch. His eyes scan the room, resting briefly on each guest with a mixture of authority and exhaustion. You wonder if the weight of the castle feels as heavy as the gold on his fingers. As the feast begins, you notice the variety on the table: bread, cheese, salted fish, fresh fruits, and plenty of meat. The cooks have prepared pottages, thick stews simmered with whatever was available. The variety is surprising, considering the reputation of medieval diets as dull and repetitive. You recall that some historians argue medieval food was more diverse and flavorful than often imagined, while others say the poor ate a far more limited diet. Conversation swirls around you: politics, local gossip, the upcoming harvest, and you can't help but feel part of this world for a moment, wrapped in the ancient ritual of sharing a meal. A servant pours more ale into your wooden cup, and you take a sip, letting the warmth spread through you. The room hums with laughter and song, the flicker of candlelight softening the edges of the day. As the evening deepens, the stories grow louder and the songs more animated. You lean back and let the medieval night settle in, a blend of comfort and wildness, tradition and change. And through it all, the castle stands firm, a timeless witness to all the feasts and fights, the quiet prayers and raucous celebrations. The feast slowly winds down, the great hall now dimmer except for the flickering firelight casting long shadows on the walls. The clatter of plates and the murmur of tired voices create a cozy atmosphere, a gentle lull that signals the end of another day in the castle. You notice the aftermath: crumbs of bread scattered on the wooden table, half-empty goblets of ale, and the faint smell of spilled wine mixed with roasted herbs. Someone has left a stray piece of cheese, the edges hardened and a bit moldy, reminding you that even medieval delicacies have their off days. The Lord retires to a quiet corner with a few trusted advisors. Their conversation is low and serious, a sharp contrast to the jovial mood that filled the room earlier. You overhear hints about upcoming conflicts and alliances, topics historians still debate over, especially how much they influenced everyday castle life. Outside, the castle walls begin to cool under the night sky, and the stars emerge like pinpricks of silver against the velvet black. A gentle breeze carries the scent of lavender from the gardens, soothing and familiar. You wander toward the barracks, where the knights and guards are preparing for the night watch. Their armor clinks softly as they move, a metallic reminder that safety here depends on vigilance, even in the stillness of night. You find yourself thinking about the strange duality of castle life, moments of warmth and celebration balanced by the ever-present need for defense and order. It's a world both harsh and tender, ancient and alive. As you make your way back to your chamber, the sounds of the castle soften to whispers. The distant bark of a dog, the slow drip of water from the battlements, the occasional creak of timber settling. You pause by the window, looking out over the darkened courtyard. The moonlight glimmers on the stone walls, and for a moment, the castle feels less like a fortress and more like a living organism, breathing quietly under the stars. A faint echo of the bard's lute drifts from the great hall, a gentle melody to lull the castle's inhabitants to sleep. You smile, remembering the strange poetry you heard earlier, and the peculiar but comforting rhythm of medieval life. You slip under the heavy blankets of your bed, the rough fabric scratchy but familiar. The chill in the air is softened by the faint warmth radiating from the hearth below. And as your eyes close, you feel a calm settle over you, a quiet peace that comes from stepping into a world so different, yet so human, so full of stories waiting to be told. The night deepens, and the castle sleeps, but your mind drifts through the corridors and chambers, carrying the scent of herbs and the faint echoes of laughter and prayer. The silence is broken only by the occasional creak of wood settling or the distant hoot of an owl. You think back to the countless lives that have passed through these stone walls, lords and ladies, servants and soldiers, scholars and fools, all woven into the tapestry of medieval existence. Their joys and fears, their triumphs and defeats, all whispered through the ages like a soft lullaby. You remember the peculiar tidbit about how some medieval nobles believed wearing a lock of their beloved's hair at night would bring sweet dreams, an ancient charm blending love and superstition. Whether it worked or not, it's a touching reminder of the human heart beating beneath the armor and gowns. Historians still argue whether medieval castles were primarily homes or fortresses, whether they symbolized power or insecurity. Perhaps they were both, endlessly balancing protection with the desire for comfort. As you settle deeper into sleep, you imagine the castle bathed in moonlight, its shadows lengthening and folding into the quiet night. The flicker of candlelight from a distant tower, the soft breathing of those tucked away in their chambers, all creating a peaceful symphony of life paused. You feel the slow, steady rhythm of the medieval world settling around you, a gentle heartbeat that lulls you into rest. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let the castle's stories carry you into dreams where history isn't boring, but alive, whispering, waiting, forever unfolding. Slowly, The day's stories settle like dust on old parchment, softening into quiet memory. You breathe deeply, feeling the weight of centuries ease off your shoulders as the castle's stones warm gently in the night. Outside, the world is hushed, cradled in the gentle arms of darkness, where time seems to stretch and yawn. You imagine the soft rustle of leaves, the whisper of a breeze brushing past ancient walls, and the faint flicker of stars like distant candles. Your thoughts drift slow and easy, as if floating down a calm river beneath a silver moon. The tales of lords and peasants, of battles and banquets, fade gently into a comforting silence, wrapped in the soft glow of memory. Let the quiet settle over you now, a tender cloak woven from the echoes of history and the gentle hum of night. There's no rush here, no urgency, just the slow, soothing pulse of life unfolding in its own perfect time. With each breath, feel your mind soften, your body relax, and the past gently rocking you toward restful sleep. Tomorrow's dawn will come with new stories, but for now, rest easy in the timeless embrace of the castle's quiet night. Sweet dreams.